I want to turn our attention to what's happening in our justice system. Unfortunately, not much, for a judge has spared a dangerous driver who led police on a high-speed chase while high on drugs from jail because of prison overcrowding. 23-year-old Bobby Lee Beanie admitted dangerous driving, 2 offences of drug driving, possessing cannabis, fraudulent use of a registration mark, and driving without a licence in wealth assurance. For his trouble, he was given a 14-month suspended sentence at Maidstone Crown Court, the judge citing a recent Court of Appeal ruling that courts can take into account the effect of the very high prison population when sentencing. Here's the Prime Minister touching on this subject in PMQs this afternoon.
Since the Rape Review Action Plan was published, we've seen police referrals double. We've seen charges double. And last year, there was a 65% increase in rape convictions. Yes. But importantly, we also changed the law to ensure that rapists would spend more time in prison. But what did his shadow policing minister say? Prison doesn't prevent crime. It tells you everything that you need to know about the Labour Party. You can't trust them to keep Britain safe.
This is very impressive, and the government's done well in those terms, but there don't seem to be the prison places, because also this afternoon I had to vote in favour of a statutory instrument that will allow us to free up prison spaces by shortening sentences, potentially by 45 days, because of the overcrowding. So to discuss the implications of this, I'm very pleased to be joined by Mark Johnson, MBE, a member of the most excellent order of the British Empire, a former prisoner and founder of the Young Offenders charity, Use a Voice, and my panel, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin MacKenzie, and the former Labour Parliamentary candidate and councillor, Kevin Craig. So thank you very much for coming in. Mark, you were a former prisoner. Yep. What do you think the answer is to overcrowding, and do you think we're putting the right people in prison?
Well, firstly, the article today about the suspended sentence, I think, is a really good sentence. That person's got more opportunity to rehabilitate in the community than he has in British prisons today. In fact, in prison at any point, but today especially. The real numbers to be concerned about is the reconviction figures. So that's what the public want. They want confidence in the justice system. And actually, strangely, lots of people, prisoners, want the same thing. They want an opportunity to change. So the functions of the justice system is punishment and reform. So we can talk about the punishment figures and the numbers going in, but really we need to take a deeper dive into what is actually happening in British prisons today. You've got this thing now called it's restricted regime, 22 hours bang up. You've got a system that's running at capacity, like literally hundreds of places in the whole of British prisons available to actually get people into. What can you do?
And 22 hours banged up will not give people the chance for reform, and it is so important to allow people a second chance.
Well, 22 hours. It was a Mandela ruling actually from the UN to say that any more would be classed as torture. So that was the definition to it, and we're right on that borderline now. The staffing figures, the calibre and the profile of staff are not there. They're leaving as quickly as they're recruiting them. There's all sorts of hidden issues with staff and relationships with prisoners and corruption and all this sort of stuff that's all hidden under this thing of like this polarisation of going, we're tough on crime, we're putting people in courts. It's not the issue. The issue is what do we do with people, to get them out and to not go back.
So they don't commit crime again.
Yeah.
I mean, Kelvin, this is what we want to be doing, isn't it? We want to make sure that people don't reoffend once they've been into prison.
Well, actually, I don't agree with you or your colleague there. It's quite clear to me that one of the issues that's going on right now is that the public, who are the victims in all these crimes, actually want to see much longer sentences and proper sentences. So this idea, for instance, I know somebody got 9 years for drugs, right? What happened? Because he pleaded guilty early, it's actually 6 years. Because he got 50% off for keeping his nose clean, and because he wore some kind of thing on his ankle, eventually he does 2 years and 10 months. After 1 year, he's allowed to go out at 7 in the morning, back again at 7 at night.
Has he reoffended?
He hasn't.
Oh, well, that's great, isn't it?
He is. Well, I hope he hasn't reoffended. I haven't seen him lately, but maybe because he's on holiday.
Isn't it marvellous that somebody who's sentenced 9 years, after 2.5 years, gets out of prison and doesn't reoffend? Prison's achieved its objective if it's done right.
Stopping reoffending is a priority, but as is, which Kelvin's alluded to, protection of the public and people's fears from criminals. I'm really interested in Mark's work because ultimately, who would choose to ever go into prison and get banged up? Why would you choose that life, So I think prison, and the government, which you may or may not remember, Jacob, because there's a lot of legislation that passes while you're in the House, but the government made commitments on new prison places. It hasn't yet fulfilled those, so that exacerbates the crisis in the prison population. But I think it's a mixture of both in that, the public they're scared about crime, right? It's high up there on the top 5 issues for the next election. That's why you hear a lot from the Labour Party about it. It's going to be one of the 5 missions, keep the streets safe. Ultimately, protect the public, but actually, prison, yes, it's about locking people up, but 22 hours a day. That's not, your mental health's going to go down. Ultimately, I want all criminals to come out and have a better life and never go back.
Kelvin, don't you protect the public best if people don't reoffend?
Yeah. I don't want anybody to reoffend, and I'm sure the ordinary public doesn't want. Yeah. What they do want, I can tell you for 101% certainty, what they don't want is what happened at Maidstone Crown Court yesterday. That was an absolute shocker, and the judge was clearly looking for some kind of preferment within the justice system to announce that. That guy should have got 18 months for that.
But Mark, you think that sentence was right?
Well, it's this polarisation issue, and you look at the data, and locking people up doesn't work. If you want a vision of the future of what you're talking about, go to America. They lock people up for longer, yet they have a lot higher reconviction figures. There's no evidence that backs longer sentences. You look at murder, for instance, have the lowest reconviction figures ever. So you've got to follow the data with this, and you've got to look at it with a broad and very calm and rational view about where does it come from. We lock people up who are mentally ill, and we don't ever want to accept that. Yeah, I've just interviewed 105 people in 12 prisons. I'll counter the medication. They're on 46 different types of medication between 105, and that's a disproportionate amount of medication, from dyslexia to brain injury that doesn't get picked up, from arrest to courts to it doesn't get looked into, ADHD, autism. Some of the predispositions for autism are being touched. The assaults on police, the way that the police generate conviction.
I cannot drop a tear for criminals. I am not.
Even if they're mentally ill.
Look, you tell me. There's hardly anybody in this country.
Injury.
There's hardly anybody from Alistair Campbell downwards who doesn't claim that they have a mental health issue.
Well, you don't, and I don't.
Well, you say that, Jacob. I've just met somebody outside.
But there is nothing wrong. May I just chip in there? Mental health is. I don't think we should joke about it, right? Because it's.
Well, it was raised there by that gentleman as one of the reasons why we shouldn't be putting people into jail. When they bash somebody over the head, they rob somebody. Suddenly the mental health card is played, and suddenly some judge who knows nothing about it.
I've never met anybody in prison that doesn't agree with being locked up. Okay, I've never. Yeah, when we look at, if we go 100,000 feet and look, half of the people that are released from British prisons are released to being homeless. We have got a situation as a country where the conditions in prison, even with 22 hours, is a better life than what people have in society. And they just fall through the cracks all the time because we're looking at this. Even in a court, the rule is about people knowing the moral difference between right and wrong, where there is so much grey area from childhood neglect and abuse, and the victim becomes a perpetrator.
And
there's a link with that.
I think it's an insult. I think it's an insult to poor people in our country to believe that the fact that you can always go to your background to say that's the reason I committed fraud. That's the reason why I bashed that person over the head.
It's not an excuse.
And I am not happy,
part of the
personally, and I honestly think in this argument, I speak for a majority of this country, I am not happy at the idea of people getting 50% discounts on their sentences. Those impact statements should be used to cut the 50%. So eventually, with a bit of luck, when you get 9 years, you get 14 years, you serve it, and actually, I would be prepared.
Mark, you've had the most
price.
direct experience of this. Your final word.
Yeah. Well, I'm 23 years clean, and from the day I got clean, I actually committed offence like this guy today. And from the day I got clean, I've never committed another offence, and I've helped thousands of people in that same situation. And I've also helped you to try and understand the truth of who we lock up.
And you've been recognised by our Sovereign for the work that you've done, which
Yeah.
is absolutely amazing. It's the model of somebody getting their life back.